Folks, it may have said on your agenda that we would have the award for Chapter Excellence. We are going to hold off on that until Friday, so that way you have to hang around to find out if you're Chapter 1 or not. I just got off the phone to my friend Tom, and I asked him, what should I say about our next speaker? And he goes, just follow the script that Tanya wrote for you. So I'm taking the chairman's advice, and I will read what Tanya gave me. I told you she is the power behind me. She makes me look good. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Gigi Sohn. Gigi, and I'm going to call her Gigi because she's a good friend of Natoa for a long, long time, is currently serving as the FCC's counselor to the chairman. She was named counselor in April 2015 by Chairman Tom Wheeler to serve as his representative at a variety of public forums across the country. She also continues her role as an advisor to the chairman and a principal contact for third-party stakeholders in the chairman's office. Prior to joining the chairman's office in November 2013 as special counsel for external affairs, she served as president and CEO of Public Knowledge from 2001 to 2013, and from 2011 to 2013 as the co-chair of the board of directors of the Broadband Internet Technical Advisory Group. That's almost like pronouncing what NTOA stands for. She has served on the board of the Telecommunications Policy Research Conference and on the advisory board for the Center for Copyright Information. In October 1997, President Clinton appointed Gigi to serve as a member of his advisory committee on the public interest obligations of digital television broadcasters. Gigi is going to give some opening remarks, and then she will be joined up on the stage by former NTOA President Ken Feldman, who will engage in a question and answer, and is, at this point, my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Gigi Sohn.
Whoa, that light is bright. Whew, right in my eyes. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you all today? Isn't San Diego awesome? It really is. Steve, thank you so much for those opening remarks, and thank you to Tanya for forcing him to say them. So, life is good. I'm in San Diego. I said that already. It's a great, great city. My New York Mets are in first place in September. New Yorkers in the audience, you may notice I'm wearing royal blue and my toenails are orange. That's just pure coincidence. And the other good news is my New York Jets are still undefeated. Although that, of course, is because they haven't played yet. But best of all, I'm with NTOA. NTOA is my kind of organization. You're committed to enhancing Americans' lives by improving our communications networks. And you do the hard work at the grassroots level to drive meaningful change. During my 2+ decades as a public interest advocate in the communications sector, I always saw NTOA as an important voice, and on many, and I would say most issues, an important ally. But my nearly 2 years as a public servant at the FCC have given me a deeper appreciation for NTOA. For most of my professional life, my role was to serve as an outside advocate, some would even say agitator, to prod change and to shape policies. But ultimately, it was up to others to deliver the results. At the FCC, my role has been reversed. Everyone is now telling my team what to do, and trust me, people get a lot of pleasure out of that. And we're the ones responsible for implementing policies. NTOA basically serves both roles. As an organization, you advocate for policies that serve the communications interests and needs of local governments. As individuals, you are the people on the front lines, developing and implementing policies to make sure your constituents can access world-class communications. Simply put, your members are pioneers. You have taken the initiative to bring fiber to your schools and libraries. You help make sure that there is quality public educational and governmental programming available in your communities. You help to ensure that people can reach 911 when they need it. And increasingly, you are planning and deploying community broadband networks. For all of your efforts, I want to say thank you. Thank you for all that you do for your communities and for our nation. But you didn't invite me out here to tell you how great NATOA is, although I assume that's not a bad thing, right? You like that. I'm here to talk about what the future holds for local governments. So let me share a few thoughts. Without question, the landscape is changing for local governments, but I think in a good way. Most significantly, the future is not in cable, but in broadband. I popped in this morning to the opening session. I was going to have my head down, and I was dressed like a slob, so nobody would recognize me. Even the cable operators acknowledge this. This is good for your citizens. The broadband future has more freedom, openness, and choice. Broadband facilitates education, healthcare, and economic empowerment. And importantly for all of you, broadband facilitates good government and civic participation. Rather than wait for incumbent ISPs to build the networks your cities want and need, you can take control of your own broadband futures. Rather than thinking of yourselves as taxers and regulators, which has been the traditional role, you can now think of yourself as facilitators of the kinds of services you've been begging the incumbents for years to provide. This is incredibly exciting, and I'm sure somewhat frightening. But the new model for local governments looks to benefit their citizens through externalities and not necessarily through direct revenues. You see this future in cities like Sandy, Oregon, which has about 10,000 residents. Without any support from taxpayer dollars, the SandyNet community broadband network is putting the finishing touches on a citywide upgrade to fiber, which makes broadband available to residents starting at $40 a month. Thanks to smart planning, the city manages SandyNet with a staff of only 5 people. You see this future in Westminster, Maryland, a historic city about 30 miles west of Baltimore. The city just launched a gigabit network that is the result of a public-private partnership with a company called Ting. The city finances, owns, and maintains the fiber infrastructure, while Ting leases the fiber from the city and provides all the equipment and services necessary to light the fiber. Thus, the partnership reduces the financial risk to the city and citizens of Westminster because the burdens and benefits of the network are shared. This incentivizes everyone to work towards the network's success. Now, we're making changes of our own at the FCC to reflect the shifting broadband landscape and to make sure that we seize the new opportunities and mitigate the challenges. For example, as many of you know, last February we preempted restrictions on community broadband in response to petitions from community broadband providers in Tennessee and North Carolina. That was pretty awesome. Come on, it's awesome. Our Connect America Fund just committed to pay $1.5 billion annually over the next 6 years to ensure that rural America gets connected. And we are in the middle of a proceeding to modernize our Lifeline program so that all Americans can get access to broadband. And somebody said this morning, it might have been Joe Van Eaton, you know, he asked people to raise their hands who's participating in certain proceedings. And we'll talk about that proceeding he talked about. But I'm talking about the Lifeline proceeding right now. If you want all your citizens to be connected, if you think Lifeline shouldn't just be a wireless phone program, but a broadband program, we need to hear your voices, and we need them now. So we at the Commission want to work with NATOA to remove barriers to broadband deployment, spur competition, and ensure access for all. We consider you to be a vital partner in achieving these goals. With that, I look forward to answering Ken's questions, and thanks again. I wore the wrong thing for, should have worn my suit. All right. All right, have at it.
Okay. So Gigi alluded to this in her comments, and Steve gave a nice introduction that Tanya wrote. Talk more. All right, we're gonna move it over here. How's that? Yes? My other lapel. Okay. Shall we vote on this? All right. Gigi and I actually share a genetic defect that causes one to root for the Jets year in and year out, despite the fact that every year since 1970 has been an unmitigated disaster. You know, if you think working at the FCC is tough, she has maintained her loyalty to these New York sports, college in Boston, law school in Philly, and living in Washington, D.C., and she's still a Mets fan and a Jets fan, so God bless you.
I just want to ask a question. Who was the worst Jets coach? Rich Kotite, Joe Walton, or Bruce Coslett? People are like, who is that? Exactly the point.
Actually, the answer is Lou Holtz. So, all right, let's get down to some more serious questions. So, I want to touch on a number of different issues, and if we have some time, we'll open it up and see what questions you all have. But we've got a pretty good list here. First, talking about the wireless shot clock rules, the co-location rules in the 6409 proceeding. It's been a number of months. Has the commission gotten any feedback from the commission's perspective? How have those rules been working? Are there problems that you see? Did the rules go too far? Any kind of thoughts on how those rules are being implemented?
So as I'm sure many of you are aware, I guess the biggest negative feedback we got was from Montgomery County, Maryland, who has appealed the order and in the Fourth Circuit, and oral argument is on October 28th. So obviously they obviously were not happy about it. But in practice, it's actually been working pretty well. So what's happened is after we adopted the rules, there was an opportunity for local governments, including NATOA, to work with the wireless industry to formulate best practices for implementation of the rules, and also to work on a model ordinance. So these things are happening now, and NATOA has been a great participant in this. So we haven't actually gotten any other feedback one way or another, but there is sort of this working group of wireless industry trade groups and local government groups, including NATOA, who are trying to craft best practices for implementation. And again, this model ordinance has been drafted, and I understand is being used in several places.
Right. So the good news is that the commission is not hearing from the industry that local governments are continuing to be barriers. So I guess we should be thankful for that. So you mentioned the North Carolina and Tennessee decisions, and as you know, NATOA very much appreciates the commission's action there. Are there any other actions that the commission might either have teed up or be thinking about taking in the next year or two that would support local government ability to invest in broadband networks or to provide broadband services, or both?
Right, so I actually mentioned two of them in my prepared remarks, but let me expand. So the second phase of the Connect America Fund, we gave out $1.5 billion annually over 6 years to price cap carriers. But those carriers left $175 million on the table in a number of states. So what's going to happen is we're going to adopt rules relatively soon. I can't tell you if it's a matter of weeks or months, for other carriers to bid on serving those areas. Well, local communities, to the extent they have networks, they can bid on that. So there's quite a bit of money on the table in those states, and I would say the most prime areas that were not bid on were the Verizon areas. Okay, so I was actually just talking to Joanne about New York and whether there might be some bidding there. Now, they did provisionally accept the money in Texas and California, but that's because Frontier are buying their systems there. So there's money in the Connect America Fund. Again, it's not $1.5 billion, but it's $175 million, not chump change. The second proceeding where I think there's an opportunity to certainly help your citizens, and again, to the extent that a lot of your communities have your own networks or running community broadband networks, is in Lifeline. Okay, and as I said before, we are proposing to turn Lifeline from a wireline and wireless phone program to a broadband program. It would still cover phone service, but to also cover broadband service. And we're asking questions, for example, about whether one needs to be an ETC, or eligible telecommunications carrier, in order to get Lifeline funding. And if you must be an ETC, is there a way we can streamline the process so we can get more competition in the Lifeline space? One of the things we found with Lifeline as a subsidy for wireless is that when we changed the rules in 2008, the Lifeline providers were offering 250 minutes for that subsidy, $9.25. Well, it hasn't changed in 7 years. And I think that's because, and the chairman thinks that's because, there's not enough competition in the space. So it's interesting, we have cable operators now interested in possibly providing Lifeline service, and I would hope some of the community networks would as well. But in any event, even if your localities don't have community networks, Lifeline is really the last part of the universal service stool. And we really, really want to see it be a very hearty program that helps that last 10% or so that cannot afford broadband. I mean, I heard Mayor Garcetti say that 30% of Los Angeles doesn't have access to broadband. You know, it's an affordability issue. We really, really want to make that work. And we really need your help in helping to make that work.
All right. Well, we had a session this morning on some of the pending issues in Washington. We talked about the net neutrality rules.
And thank you for your support on that. That was big. That was big.
So we all know that we're in court again. There's a long list of entities that didn't quite agree with the commission majority. So if those rules are struck down again, is there a plan B?
So let me say first that the chairman strongly believes that we are on extremely solid legal ground and that we will prevail. And that there is precedent from the Brand X Supreme Court decision, which I know many of you are very familiar with, to the recent Verizon decision that struck down our last try at the rules, that we are going to prevail and that we won't have to address that question. However, while I can't predict what the FCC will do, or even if we'll be around when the decision comes down, I think we probably will. While I can't predict what we're going to do, I will say that there's been a decade-long debate over whether citizens should have the freedom to decide what applications, content, services they should use without the interference of an internet service provider serving as a gatekeeper. We've had that debate, and it's pretty clear that no matter where you come out on the political divide, you think that's a good thing. All right? You may not agree with how we did it. You may not have agreed with the decision to reclassify broadband internet access as a Title II service, but you still don't think that incumbent ISPs should pick and choose for you winners and losers on the internet. So to the extent that that is the case, I think the next step, if we were to lose in court, would be to try to some way, again, instantiate that notion into FCC rules. I think we will try again. I can't tell you how we will try again. Obviously, that depends on what the court says. But I still think we're going to win.
Okay. We hope you're right. So we have a bunch more questions on specific issues, but let me go with a broad issue first. And you talked a little bit about this when you were making your comments with regard to the Lifeline program. But are there other issues where local governments and NATOA in particular can help the commission in reaching some of the goals that the chairman has left for his administration?
I mean, I think Lifeline is the biggest one that's being teed up right now. And, you know, we need to know what's happening in your communities. And one of the things about Lifeline that I think is unfortunate is that a very large percentage of the eligible communities are not applying even. And we need to know why that is the case and how we can help. Look, we're asking a lot of questions. Let me tell you some of the key questions we're asking. I'd say that perhaps the most important question we're asking is, we've proposed that there be a minimal level of service that needs to be given by an internet service provider for Lifeline. So the idea is, if you are poor, you shouldn't get second-class internet service. We need help defining what that minimal level of service means. We also need help in figuring out how to speed up the process for determining eligibility. So we've proposed not to have the carrier themselves determine eligibility because there's some not great incentives in doing that. And I think it's caused some waste, fraud, and abuse, although we've done I think the FCC's done a great job, particularly in its 2012 reforms, in limiting that waste, fraud, and abuse. But we're looking at setting a national eligibility verifier where if you're a carrier, you can basically press a button and you can find out whether John Doe or Jane Doe is eligible. Now, a lot of states, like California, have eligibility databases as well. And we need to know, A, what are the things that have worked in those databases, and also how, I'm not saying we should get rid of the California database or the other few states that have them, but how can we work together to have a seamless eligibility system? So I urge you to read that notice of proposed rulemaking. The time for reply comments, I believe, is the end of this month. The regular comments were due at the end of August, and I think, yeah, September 30th is the due date. But there are a lot of questions there that we could use your help as regulators, as government officials, to try to figure out how to make this system really work for the least advantaged in our nation.
One of the things that the Commission has done since the adoption of the National Broadband Plan is periodically look at the speeds for broadband. What is the minimum speed that we would consider to be broadband? Is the Commission going to be looking at that anytime in the near future to increase it again?
So every year, we put out a notice of inquiry to determine whether broadband is being deployed in a reasonable and timely manner. That is called technically the Section 706 report. We've also started calling it the Broadband Progress Report. And we actually, last month, just put out a new notice of inquiry asking a number of questions. And this follows up on the decision we made, I believe it was in February, to increase the baseline speed for what is broadband in order to make that determination to 25 megabits per second down and 3 up. And that was up from 4 down and 1 up. And that decision was made based on the reality of how people use broadband today. You've got multiple devices in the home. There are folks doing their homework. They're doing online courses. Of course, they're watching Netflix. So 4.1 was really a silly standard. So we increased it to 25.3, and I'll tell you something that's probably not that much of a secret. We would have liked to do more, but I think this was a good interim step. So in this notice of inquiry, again, I hope you will participate. Comments are due on September 15th, and then reply comments on September 30th. We've determined not to raise the standard again, not this year, but to look at, how do we fold in mobile to this determination? Because we didn't really do that last time. And also, should we look at things like consistency of service, latency, other factors? The chairman just got a letter today from Congresswoman Eshoo asking us to look at things like data caps or below-the-line fees. So what are the factors we ought to be looking at in determining whether broadband is being deployed in a reasonable and timely manner? And what is that? So what if we determine it doesn't? Okay, it's not being deployed, which we have the last several years. why should you care? Well, you should care because if we determine no, then under another section of 706, we can take a bunch of steps to promote broadband deployment. And in fact, that was the basis upon which we preempted the Tennessee and North Carolina laws. We carefully looked at those laws and we said, oh, particularly the North Carolina one, which, made the municipalities jump through all these crazy hoops and wouldn't allow them to charge less than what the commercial incumbent would charge. We said, oh, these are barriers to deployment. Broadband is not being deployed in a timely fashion, so we can do this. So it's really actually, if you don't think broadband is being deployed adequately in your communities, in your states, in your towns, in your cities, then this is an important one to participate in.
All right. One of the other issues that we talked about in this morning's regulatory session was the MVPD over-the-top proceeding. And local governments are really watching that proceeding and participating in it with great interest. And I think it's fair to say that we support innovation and we support new services and products. These are great things for consumers, and they always seem to come at a financial cost to local governments. So one of the things we'd like you to comment on is whether you have any ideas about how the regulatory efforts to promote competition can be undertaken without risking the current and the future revenues to local governments.
I have to say, this one puzzles me a little bit, why folks are concerned, and I'm glad I came this morning to hear about it. Let me talk a little bit about the purpose of this proceeding, okay? And again, just to step back and explain. There are companies, young new companies, that provide linear cable service, right? Linear subscription channels, but they don't have a pipe, right? The most famous one, you've probably never heard of any of them. Yip TV, Layer 3, which actually is in Boulder. Sky Angel was probably the best well-known, okay? So they want to get the benefits of things like program access, so they can get programming from vertically integrated cable operators. And they can't do it because they're in this sort of regulatory netherworld. They're not MVPDs, multi-channel video programming distributors, thank you. And so the first purpose of proposing that we say that, again, only linear subscription channels, so it looks like, a cable service, can get this MVPD moniker. The first purpose is to promote more video competition. All right, these are people without pipes. And we think video competition is a good idea. So, that's the number one purpose. The number two purpose, and this is the thing that I would hope would give you comfort, and Joe, I have to say, I was a little bit surprised at hearing some of the things you were saying this morning. The second purpose is to make sure that the incumbents can't go to all IP and evade regulation and evade franchise fees. So I was really a little bit surprised. Look at paragraph 78. Yank it out of your book and look it up online. Paragraph 78 says that's exactly what we don't want to do, is have the incumbents say, oh, this is IP delivery, so it's no longer regulated. So that's the second purpose. So I think I understand your concern and your fear, but the chairman feels passionately that if we don't do something like this and make it absolutely clear that if, for instance, the Comcast stream service is tied to its facilities, it's still a cable service run over a cable system, and it has all the attendant duties and responsibilities, including franchise fees. So that is the purpose. So I want to give you some comfort. I do want to encourage you, as Joe did, to participate and express your concerns. But we're super, super clear that we don't want IP delivery to be a way for incumbents to evade regulation. We want to make it clear that, no, you're still subject to the same responsibilities, all the while allowing these new folks who none of you have ever heard of to actually have a business model to benefit consumers.
Okay. I've got a few more questions. I'm actually going to skip over a couple of them so that we have time for a few from the audience. I suspect on that last issue there may be a follow-up or two. The role of FCC advisory committees has come under attack from some people at the Commission. From your perspective, the chairman's perspective, do they have a role to play? Do they have credibility and impact on the 8th floor?
So I don't think anybody is attacking the advisory committees and saying they shouldn't be there, okay? I think the attacks, which have come from one commissioner, he's been concerned because the chairman has control and who picks it. That's the way, that's the way the FCC runs, is the chairman, all the power is vested in the chairman. I like that now, and that's something that I don't see changing anytime soon. There's also been some concerns with some of the advisory committees that staff has been too active and they have an agenda. They question whether they're really voluntary. So I'm not sure anybody is questioning the role of the advisory committees. I think we would be foolish, and I know the chairman shares my view, if we didn't take advice from outside sources. That wasn't fun. As smart as my colleagues are, we don't have all the answers. So for example, Ken serves on the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. And we need to hear from folks, and we need to have, a steady, body that can advise us on any number of things. And I would say your advisory committee is about as independent to the extent that it has given us recommendations that have been contrary to things we've done. So I'm not worried about the independence, but I think it's critically important that we have outside experts who advise us on the issues that we work on every day. And I don't think there's any debate about that. The debate about whether it's really voluntary, whether the chairman has too much power, those are great debates to have, when we're having these many debates on FCC reform, but I don't think anybody really questions whether the advisory committees are important, and I will tell you, they are valued in the chairman's office a great deal.
Okay, so this next question probably falls under the category of do as I say, not as I do. On the local government side, we've talked about the shot clocks and how much we don't like the federal government telling us how quickly we have to act. So let me turn the table a little bit and mention two proceedings, the AT&T UVerse petition and Philadelphia's OTARD petition. Is Michael here? I think I saw him before, right? We have Philadelphia here. Are we ever going to see action on these petitions?
Look, I'll be frank. Congress has given us, and given the Media Bureau particularly, a lot of mandates with statutory deadlines. So you have the COMM Act, which is the Loud Ad Act. You have the CVAA, the Communications and Video Accessibility Act, and you have STELLAR, which is I don't even know what it stands for, but it's the bill that needs to be renewed every couple of years to make sure that satellite providers get distant signal compulsory license. They have so many statutory deadlines. In STELLAR, they've got about 3 or 4 things they need to do. It's just, those two are being analyzed, they're being looked at by the Media Bureau, they're being considered, but when it comes to priorities, when Congress tells us to jump, we ask how high. So it's unfortunately kind of fallen, in the back of other priorities that we really don't have the discretion to do or not do.
Okay. Hopefully you can at least take back the message that people are still
I will.
Waiting.
I promise. I hear you.
Okay. I'm going to cut the last one short so we can get to questions, but you mentioned the $1.5 billion for the CAF funds, and NTOA really applauds that action. How is the Commission going to monitor the carriers that got that money to make sure it gets spent properly and it gets spent in the right places? And what are the enforcement mechanisms if there are problems with that?
Okay, before I answer that question, I hope people have noticed that there's a new day for enforcement at the FCC. And we have an enforcement bureau led by a gentleman named Travis LeBlanc, who is not willing to, to sit around and twiddle his thumbs. He actually wants to enforce the rules. And he's done some incredible stuff to make sure that, the folks who have our public trust are obeying the rules. So I just want to say, enforcement is very, very important to the chairman. So let me tell you what we're doing in the CAF context. So first of all, we've set interim milestones for the carriers to meet, and they have to report annually on those milestones. If they don't meet those milestones, then they have some time to cure, okay? If they still don't meet those milestones, then we can actually take away the funding from them. So there are actually strong standards that we've set for withholding support if they do not meet those milestones. So we are seriously focused on ensuring that the promises made by the carriers are met, and we will enforce those promises every way and with every bit of power that we can.
Okay, and let me suggest to those of you who are in states where carriers got that money, you ought to keep an eye on it also. And that's one way we can help the FCC, is to report if we think there are problems locally. So let's take a few questions.
But just let me,
yeah.
I want to just follow up on that, because I think that's really important. To the extent that there are things happening in the field where you guys are that we might not know of, please let me know. I'm sure you folks know Carol Maddy in our bureau who works on Connect America Fund issues. I'm sure a lot of you know Jonathan Chambers, who works on a lot of these issues. If something is amiss, let us know. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal filing. It can just be a phone call. We really need your eyes and ears on this. And I see you guys as having two roles. Advocating, critically important. And I was talking at lunch about how the city of New York, the city of Los Angeles, Baltimore, Chicago, and others have been super active in all of our proceedings, net neutrality, municipal broadband, Lifeline. We want to continue to see that. The second role I see for you guys is facilitating. I talked about that in my opening remarks, and facilitating the deployment of broadband, facilitating your citizens getting the kind of high-speed broadband they need. So, like I said, we consider you partners, and we look forward to working with your members individually and with NATOA collectively.
Okay, Catherine's got the mic, and Jeff gets the first question. I have to turn mine off, or that one won't work.
And could you introduce yourself, even though I just met you?
Okay.
But other people
Does this
might
work?
not know who you are.
I'm Jeffrey Gavlinski from the state of Colorado. I run a broadband conference there called Mountain Connect. And I had a question regarding the CAF funding. At what point do you see the build requirements in terms of speeds that they have to deliver parallel the funding? So in this particular case, Colorado got our CenturyLink opted to take the state on, and just in terms of the funding that was available. And it's $120+ million over 6 years. However, they're building towards a 10-1 model, not a 25-3 model, and the markets are already determined in a lot of cases that that's insufficient. So is that a really good spend of that money? And wouldn't it have been better to have a 25-3 model in place for that funding so that we're not revisiting this in 5 or 6 years?
Well, look,
Thank you.
the only way I can answer that is, look, we've determined that in order to get CAF money, you had to do at least 10-1. Would 25-3 be better? Sure, it would be better, okay? But, we have to deal with sort of the realities of not only the marketplace, but the realities of what's possible to deliver in those areas. Look, we want more and better. We want 50 megabits per second. We want 100 megabits per second. But, I think you've got to walk before you run, and that's why we're starting there. But, again, if you're going to participate in the Lifeline proceeding, think about these same kind of things.
This is a comment, more than a question. Pardon?
Introduce yourself.
Hi, Joanne.
I'm sure
Hovas.
everybody knows you, but introduce yourself anyway.
Joanne Hovas, CTC Technology and Energy. Thank you for being here. And on the note of thank you, I think it's a huge understatement to suggest, as I will now, that 2 years ago there was not a single serious person in Washington or anywhere else who thought that the FCC would impose reasonable net neutrality requirements under Title II and preempt anti-local government state laws that sought to inhibit the development of competition. And yet, you did both of those things in February. So, and I know you had no small part in that. I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, look, all credit goes to Tom Wheeler. He, people were suspicious of him. I supported him right off the bat, kind of knowing where he was in his life and knowing how he thought. He really, really wanted to do this right. And let me tell you something. If you think he's going to glide into the sunset the next 16 months, forget about it. I was telling Joanne at breakfast this morning, we've got about another, half a dozen big things lined up. So get ready. And those of you who are lawyers representing people in this space, celebrate or don't, because you won't get a vacation for the next 16 months. But look, the good news about all power being in the chairman is that he has an agenda, and he's actually benefited from working for some of these companies because he knows their good side and he also knows their bad side and their tendency towards monopoly. So when he says he wants to promote competition, he's not kidding. And to the extent that occasionally he listens to me, that's great too.
Rick Elrod, Fairfax County. To follow up on the question about shot clocks, I take your point about statutory deadlines. That's conditions under which the Commission has to labor. But I've noticed that even with the statutory deadlines, the Commission frequently acts promptly on industry requests, such as the original CTIA petition, the 621 petition, and so forth. Can we find a way for the Commission to act just as promptly on issues that are important to us and to the public as it does on the industries?
Well, I would say that under Chairman Wheeler, the public interest has been served many, many times and will continue to be. Okay, it is possible. I don't deny that there are some issues of interest to this group here that have not been acted on as timely a fashion as you would like. Trust me, as somebody who worked in the public interest and probably still has petitions that are fraying at the edges, I understand how you feel, and that's true of industries as well. So it really, the chairman, when he says, the consumer is my client, he really, really means that. And if you look at the body of work, okay, and it goes beyond net neutrality, and preemption. It's what he's done for the disabled, promoting more closed captioning. It goes to public safety, text to 911, location accuracy. Again, look at the body of what we've done in the enforcement action. Huge penalties for slamming, cramming, truth in billing fraud, data breach, privacy violations. I would say, the legacy of this chairman is that he put the public interest first. And yes, everybody has a story to tell about a petition that wasn't acted upon in a timely fashion. We have a reform project. We're trying to get through, stuff that's been sitting there forever. But I really think this FCC is singular. There's a reason why I went, I basically took a risk with 25 years reputation as a public interest advocate and went to work for this guy who everybody thought was just going to be a toady for the industries he worked for. It's because he cares about the public first. And again, if you look at the body of what he's done, it's pretty remarkable. And again, we still have another 17 months to go.
Okay, last one, Mitzi.
Hi, Mitzi Herrera.
Hey, Mitzi.
Hi. Gigi was my mentor in law school, so
I don't
everything I
believe
learned
it.
about public advocacy, I learned from Gigi. And I work for Montgomery County, Maryland. Gigi, you mentioned, let me just sort of get to the cut of the chase. The FCC auctions off spectrum. You collect over $500 million in cable fees. You got taxes on telecom services. Wireline, ILECs charge termination fees if you use their network to deliver calls. The FCC is looking to help resolve, and I applaud their efforts, particularly in the E-rate reform, helping us get the wiring for schools, the Connect America Fund, and looking at ways to connect rural parts of America, and you're putting money at that. So why, you look at local governments, you look at the way that we use our libraries, our PEG centers, our community media, our different work, our 911 systems that we implement, and all those things that we do that cost money. Why in your opening remarks is it that okay for the federal government to collect money and use regulations to solve market failures, but you suggest that local government should be reduced to externalities and not getting revenue?
Yeah, I think that you can applaud for what you just said. I mean, I don't think you should. Well, number one, I agree with what the gentleman said this morning, is that, the cable model is not going away tomorrow, okay? So I don't think those revenues are just going to dry up. And I didn't say that you should not have revenues, okay? But what I did say was that you need to look towards the externalities that building one's network, one's own network provides. So it's not just direct revenues, it's also the externalities. I just think, look, I think you also have to just be realistic. It is possible, while I believe that cable revenues are not going away tomorrow for a variety of reasons. I think there's always going to be folks that want the bundle. The content providers charge a lot more for online rights, and people like the quality of service that cable brings. I mean, I still have a cable bundle. Sometimes I don't understand why, but I do. It's easy. So I don't think that revenue stream is going away anytime soon, but I also think that that can't be the only focus, that the focus has to be to the benefits to your constituents, because that's really what you're in business for, right? You're in business to benefit your constituents. And what your constituents need right now in order to participate in all phases of society, I love what Mayor Garcetti said, it is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And I think that's just something that you guys have to look at and not just have the laser focus on the revenues. The revenues will be there, they may not be as much, but you also have to look at the externalities.
Let me close this way. We don't always agree, but with this chairman and this commission and with friends like Gigi at the FCC, we have a seat at the table, and we have earned the respect as an organization of those who make the policy and implement the policy, and our job is to continue being involved and to increase the level of our involvement. And with that, please join me in thanking Gigi for coming to our conference. Steve, are there any housekeeping measures we need to announce? Get out, just get out. Okay, next session starts at 12:30 or 2:30.